Are you looking for a reason to celebrate? Are you excited about something happening that you can be a part of? Well, have we got news for you. Hi, I'm Lora Schaunaman, the Curator of Exhibits here at the Dacotah Prairie Museum. And this year, in the year 2020, we are celebrating our golden anniversary. We're 50 years old and still going strong. Now that's something to celebrate. When the museum started, it was long ago in the 1960s, and even before that. The children and grandchildren of the pioneers, the homesteaders in this area, had started to wonder what would happen to their way of life. They were getting older, and they were looking around and seeing how things had changed. They wondered about the things they used and their parents and grandparents used on farms in South Dakota years ago. The things they learned that were lessons, the stories they heard. What would become of those things now that time was passing? They realized what they needed was a place to save things that were special from those days. A place where people could learn the stories and be taught the lessons that they had grown up with on the prairies. They needed a museum. When the pioneer and homesteaders' children and grandchildren thought back on the way they grew up on the prairie, they didn't think about tractors and combines. They thought about these: hoes, shovels, and pitchforks, as the way their grandparents had farmed. When they needed light to study and do their homework, they didn't just flip the switch on the wall and turn on the electric lights. Instead, they had something like this: an oil lamp where they would turn up the wick, light it with a match, and then replace the glass chimney on top and have enough light to do their homework for the whole table. They didn't order all of their blankets and sheets from Amazon.com. What they did was have grandmothers and mothers, sometimes older sisters, that would piece these beautiful quilts together of old pieces of fabric to keep them toasty warm in those winter nights. And also, if they needed a new dress for Christmas or a new work set of clothes for the farm in the summer, their mothers would sew all their clothes. Even beautiful dresses like this, made especially for them to their taste and to fit them perfectly. When the homesteaders, children, and grandchildren thought back on these things, they decided the museum was a good place to keep them. Now, many people in Brown County were excited about a museum, but starting a museum for the first time was more work than they had anticipated at first. They needed to gather all the artifacts between many people in Brown County. They needed to clean them and count them and order them, and then they needed to hire a director of the museum so that someone would be in charge and know what the day-to-day workings of the museum should be. They also had to have a lot of volunteers to be on boards and committees that would help that director do their job. They needed to have fundraisers because they didn't have much money to start with, only a few donations, and they needed quite a bit of money to start a museum and to see to its care and its scheduling. They also had to, and this was maybe most important, find just the right place for this museum to be, a home for the museum that lots of people could find and come to learn and enjoy. Luckily for us, in this part of Brown County and South Dakota, we had a lot of museum heroes. They were people that not only thought the museum was a great idea and a super place to keep all these valuable things, but they were more than willing to do all the work it took to start the Dacotah Prairie Museum. And that took several years of planning and doing. When the Dacotah Prairie Museum opened in 1970, this is the way that people dressed. Sometimes men wore leisure suits, girls in their mini skirts. This is the way they played their music. The little record on a phonograph. And this is how they watched television. We know a lot has changed since 1970, and the Dacotah Prairie Museum has changed right along with it. I'd like to introduce you to one of those museum heroes we talked about earlier. This is Miss Helen Berg. In this picture, Miss Helen Berg is demonstrating how to use some of the farm equipment that the homesteaders in this area used. Some of them must have looked very familiar to her because her own grandfather was a homesteader. This is Miss Helen Berg demonstrating how to use a printing press by hand. She even let the children pick out the little square blocks with letters on to form their first name and then let them print that. She was one of our museum heroes for sure. She was not only instrumental in starting the museum, but she also was the educator for the new museum for many years. Even though Miss Berg did programs every month of the year, she only did a few, as many as she could manage, being a one-room school teacher. But last year, Sherry and Mary, our educators here at the museum, did over 440 programs. That's more than one for every day of the year. When the museum opened in 1970, there were 8 separate exhibits. People loved to see those exhibits, which showed a farmstead, an office building, even a barber shop. But last year, Mary Ann and I did about 20 new exhibits in just 1 year. When the museum started in 1970, the first people that organized it had collected over 3,000 artifacts. But last year, Jackie in collections has told us that we now have 45,000 artifacts in our collection. Now, we just can't wait for you to come back to the Dacotah Prairie Museum in 2020 and see all the things we have done while we've been closed. But until that day, we hope you will continue to follow our Facebook page, our Twitter, and also we're going to be having some new programs, tours, and also educational classes on YouTube. We hope to stay in touch with you and see you again very soon. That's our celebration.